Welcome to Starting with Today's Estate Planning and the Black Community. And we are excited about this very necessary conversation about where to start with estate planning, who needs to be there, who needs to be involved, and all the information and resources that you need to get started. So stay tuned, grab something to drink and snacks to unwind with us, and we'll get started shortly. Thank you. All right, everyone is in the building. All right. Right. Thank you all for joining. How you doing, Latavia?
I'm doing well. How are you?
Great. And I see Natalie's here. Let me make sure she got my invitation. Invite. All right. Hey. Happy Wednesday, everybody. Happy hump day. We are making it through together.
Yes, on this rainy Wednesday.
I know. it came here and then it went. Let me see. Let me try Natalie one more time. Natalie, are you seeing the invitation? And while we're doing that, I'll go ahead and put in the, it's saying she's unable to join.
Uh-oh. I thought it increased the, oops.
Yeah, you can still add more people. Natalie, try, you might need to update your app in the App Store. That's probably what it is. So try to update your app in the App Store and come back to us. Hey, everybody. Hey, we're getting started shortly. In the meantime, Latavia, give us a little background about you. What brings you to this part of your career? How did you get here? Give us an overview, please.
Okay, let me give the clip.
Hey,
No, so my name's Latavia Alexander. I'm
Esquire.
I am an attorney. I've been for 10 years, and kind of over the last 10 years, I've done a variety of things. But I always say education has been kind of the core of everything that I do. So I've done landlord tenant, foreclosure, estate planning, trademarks, business, but with my current practice, I'm the owner of LA Legal Solutions.
Yes.
Essentially helping individuals and businesses build and protect their legacy. And a part of that is estate planning. And estate planning is near and dear to my heart because it's necessary. It's one of those things that we all need to do. We're doing it, even though we don't realize it sometimes, because they say if you fail to plan, you plan to fail. So, and especially in our community, it's not talked about. We don't talk about it. We don't want to think about death. Oftentimes we don't talk about it until someone has died and we're trying to figure it out. And so my passion is around educating and starting a conversation. And so part of why I'm here today or tonight is just like to be able to continue that conversation. And I always tell people there's a lot of layers to it, but the important thing is that you at least start thinking about it and having the conversation, because there's a lot of small things we can do that don't necessarily cost us extra money.
I love that. And one of the things, so, hey, everyone, my name is Charlene Anderson. I'm the founder and executive director of Starting With Today. Welcome to our estate planning in the Black community conversation. One of the reasons why I wanted to have this conversation was just thinking about the grief that the Black community has been through over the last 2.5 years. I think a lot of times we're just moving on without acknowledging it has been we've lost a lot of community members in this last couple of years. And then how do we begin to make sure that the obstacles around that, especially untimely deaths, we had this conversation. We had Latavia with us in February of 2020 at the Shape Up in the barbershop, at Lee's Barbershop, right on the heels in response to Kobe's death, Kobe Bryant's untimely death. So we've had a brief conversation on this before because it's really hard to get all of it in such a short amount of time. But I wanted to have this online, and I knew I wanted to bring it online watching Insecure this past season, and I knew seeing Molly, deal with her mother's transition, and I loved how she got Kelly involved to really navigate that. And so I was like, I got to bring Latavia back. We got to have this conversation. We have to archive this conversation and have it as a resource for our community, and just really begin to acknowledge it. Okay, I'm sending the invite again, Natalie. And one of the reasons why I wanted to have Natalie a part of this conversation is because she just went through the process. Like, she just went through the process, and I think I learned so much just in conversation with her. And I thought it was a great idea to bring her on as well. Let me see if it's letting. Any luck on your end, Natalie?
She may need to try requesting on her end.
Okay. Yeah, Natalie, try requesting on your end. There is a button at the bottom next to comment, and it has like a video plus sign. I think that's how you do it. While we're doing that, hopefully we can get her on. Let's get a really working definition of estate planning. So as I was doing the post, I said, let me go back and look for a really good working definition of it. But Latavia, can you tell us about, how do you explain estate planning to people who think we know what it is, but maybe we do, maybe we don't?
I like to speak in plain terms. So my plain terms or basic English definition of estate planning is essentially making a plan for how you want your estate.
I'm on. Now let me turn the camera around. Sorry. There I am. Hey. So sorry. You know I'm a dinosaur, Charlotte. So.
And then turn it. There you. The other way. We're gonna get it together.
Are you sideways? All right. There
we go. Thanks everybody for your patience.
All
right, so let's get back into this working definition, Latavia.
Yeah, so like I said, estate planning, I just like to explain it. It is essentially making a plan. It is the process of making a plan for your estate. And people always hear estate. I know me. I used to hear estate, think of this big sprawling lands. You have this
community.
It's everything, but essentially it's making a plan for your life and your assets. What's going to happen when you are no longer here? But the part that often gets overlooked is there's aspects of it that apply while we're still living. I.e., if you get ill, or even if it's a temporary illness to where you are temporarily disabled or incapacitated, who's going to manage your finances, who's making decisions for you. So that is a part of it as well. I always like to split it up into we have our life documents and then our after death documents.
I love that. And I have 0 life documents. I'm just assuming my parents will take care of everything, provided they're still here. One of the things that after the conversation on Insecure, I started making my last wishes. And one of my last wishes was, I really need lemon pound cake at the repast. You know what I'm saying? It's very lemon cake, with icing. It needs. I have a very specific about the vibe of the repast. So I think it's important to kind of think about those details too. But let me bring Natalie on. Natalie, thank you so much for joining us. Tell us a little bit about you, maybe something that you enjoy, and then tell us why you decided to go through the estate planning process recently for yourself.
Right. So first of all, thank you too for your patience.
Yeah.
As far as something that I like, I like this. I like Black women getting together and sharing information that improves the quality of our lives. I love this. And what brought me to estate planning was really a training that my job offered on completing our benefits documents. And that was when I realized that I had my niece, who's a minor, as a beneficiary and my documents, and that was not legal. She could not legally claim that money. And I had no idea. I don't have any children. I don't plan to have any children. So I know I want to leave everything to her, but I had no idea that she wouldn't actually be able to inherit it. And so that's what really started the process of me thinking, okay, I need to figure out how to get the money to her. And a minor trust was suggested to me. And so I reached out to an attorney through my company to start that process. And that's what got me started down that path.
Awesome. I love that. I love that because a lot of times we don't think about beneficiaries. I know one thing I learned working in HR was like, if you're married, your spouse is automatically the beneficiary. Like they have to sign away their rights, you know what I'm saying? So if you're estranged, it's they getting the money. So that's something you
even if you have moved on.
Even if you have moved on, the document has not.
Yeah. And that was what I found out. The contracts trump everything else, right? So even if you get remarried and people just kind of assume that doesn't count anymore, that your ex could inherit if their name is actually on that contract. Or like in my case, my niece's parents would have inherited, like, because they're her guardians. And so it's something you don't think about. And like, until, well, you have to really, and so, it's important though. It's important to, like you said, also think about what your wishes are, because I think this has opened up the opportunity for me to really think about how do you want to be remembered? How do you want your life honored? And even what kind of traditions and things do you want to incorporate into that,
I love that. I love that. So another thing, Latavia, what you were saying about life documents. So let's kind of start there, right? So we're excited about life. We're we still got some gas in our engine.
Yeah.
We are exploring life. What are some documents that you feel like we should have? And I've seen some of Natalie's just in conversation about things I hadn't thought about, like if something should go wrong tomorrow, what would happen?
Yeah, so no, those are great, and Natalie, I love everything that you shared, because there's so many nuggets in there that people don't realize or forget. But when I think about, or when I classify life documents, that would be some states call it a healthcare power of attorney or living will, or Maryland, DC area calls it advanced medical directive. And that is a document that most states have created, like a statutory form or standard form, where that's where if something were to happen unexpected health-wise, where, okay, I'm no longer able to make decisions for myself, or I'm in the hospital terminally ill, or I have a terminal illness, you can appoint someone to be your healthcare agent. Essentially, like you were saying earlier, like most likely it'll be your parents. That is the default if you're not married or you don't have children. But, and I always bring up the Terry Schiavo case from years ago. She was married, but her parents, there was nothing in writing. So that turned into this 10, 15-year legal battle of whether or not they should keep her on life support or not. So that's one that it can be as simple as, hey, this is who I want to make these decisions, and leave it at that. Or you can go as detailed as to, I want you to consult specific people before you make a decision. I want you to defer to the doctors. I want you to get a second opinion. In this situation, this is what I want you to do. So you can get as detailed as you want, even specifying whether or not you want to be an organ donor or not, things like that. The other is a power of attorney. Most times I think people think about a power of attorney when our parents get older or they're getting sick and they need help making decisions. But it's something that I say, even as those of us who are a little younger or less seasoned, could still think about, because the challenge with that is oftentimes people wait until something happens. And at that point, with the power of attorney specifically, you, the individual, have to give that power to someone else. And so if I have one now, they have it where you can put one, you can sign it so it goes into effect right away, or you can have it go into effect after a specific event. And they call those springing power of attorneys. Everyone has a different preference, but essentially what that does is, if something were to happen where you're no longer able to make those decisions, then that person that you have designated already has the authority to do it. The challenge that a lot of people run into, and I've had this in my family, is especially during the height of the pandemic. This happened with an uncle who unfortunately passed away, but there was no power of attorney, advanced medical director, anything like that in place. He got sick, was in the hospital with COVID. And there were things that my aunt, who was his wife, certain things she still couldn't do with that. And then it was a matter of trying to go through the guardianship process, which is a lot more involved. You have to go through the courts. It's a much more formal process. And so those are two that I say, regardless of your age or status, what you have in the bank or don't, whether you have children or not, those are two that are great to have.
I love that. And so do you have for that medical directive correct form for DC, Maryland area? And what's the other name if you're
some states refer to it as a healthcare power of attorney.
Healthcare power of attorney.
Yes.
So we can Google that and get that form, right?
Yes.
I know it's like a regular sheet, but what you're saying, we probably can add to it, like, saying, hey, if, we're getting a second, we want a third opinion. And then if, once we get that opinion, then we want X to happen, whether that's leave me on life support or let me transition naturally or continue to do life-saving. And who would make that decision on my behalf,
Yes. All of, like I said, the form, I will say the states, they did a good job of kind of laying all those things out. I'll be honest, it can be overwhelming if you are not like emotionally ready for that form. And so I always tell clients, hey, we can stop right here, just designate a healthcare agent. And then you can, as you had more time or wait to think about it. But yeah, so you can be it can be very narrow, very broad, or you can get a lot more specific.
Natalie, can you talk a little bit about that process, like emotionally going through it, filling that form out? What was your process, or what was your approach to it, or how did you feel after it was done?
It was sobering, I'll tell you that much. Thinking about yourself in an incapacitated state, thinking about what your loved ones will be left to deal with. It's not easy. And it took me, we talked about this process, Charlene. I think I reached out to the attorney maybe in May or early June. It took me about 2 months, because it's kind of heavy material, that you're going through and thinking about. And also, it took me some time because you also want to be intentional about this, right? It's not something that you just kind of want to write off. You can change, I know you can update your will, but let's say you don't get a chance to update it, you do want to be intentional. So it's emotional, it's kind of difficult. But like I said, the bright spot in that was thinking, okay, well, what can I incorporate into this that is representative of my life, of my ideals, what I valued in life? How can I put that into the will? And you live on really kind of through some of it.
I love that, because it's kind of like you still having some autonomy of yourself, even as you transition.
Exactly. It's having some control over what happens when you don't have control. And that's empowering when you're thinking about death, right? Which is obviously the loss of, the letting go of. So it was difficult at first, but it got easier. And I took breaks. I wrote a couple of drafts, and then I was like, no, I don't want that. No, I do want this. And so, that's kind of what it was like, kind of like up and down, but it ended well. I feel good about it now. I feel good that I've taken care of my niece. I feel good that I've set the stage so that she can be okay, when I'm not here, and my family will know what to do, and my friends will know what to do. Yeah.
Absolutely. So we talked about we should be thinking about the life documents now. When should we be thinking about the other post-life documents, Latavia?
I hate to now.
Right now.
it is an emotionally draining thing. It's a lot to think about. Like she was saying, you don't want to enter into it lightly, because these are decisions that are going to, can affect you now as well as your family after. And so I say think about it now, or at least as Natalie mentioned, she started the conversation. the documents didn't necessarily get created that same day or that same week. But I think the sooner we start thinking about it, and even like, what she said, I always encourage people, just start writing it down, having the conversation and kind of talking through for yourself, and then with family members and friends of like, what do I want? What would I want this to look like? So that way, hopefully sooner rather than later, you can actually start the process of creating the documents. And so, like I said, and I'll be honest, none of these require an attorney to create. However, I strongly encourage everyone to at least have a conversation with an attorney licensed in the state that you live in, because there are things that, words have power. And we can write it out in a way where we think it has one effect. But if you don't know what the laws are in that state, what you intended may not be accurately conveyed on the paper. And so, like I said, start now, writing out, even if it's just having, if you're listening, start thinking now, kind of jotting down like, okay, do I have any minor children in my life that either I'm currently responsible for or that I want to make sure that I'm providing for when I'm no longer here? Even if they're not a minor, is there someone who has special needs that needs to be provided for, that if you're not here, that goes away? If you have elderly parents or anyone that you're providing care for, even pets. I don't have pets, but I know pets are important to people. So even that, those are things of just like, hey, what goes on in my day to day? If I was not here, if for a week, even if you think about it, with our jobs, we're going to be on vacation, all that stuff we do in preparation to be on vacation, it's somewhat like that. And if you own a business, this is also something that you need to think about of, okay, hey, even if it's, hey, one day I'm not going to want to do this anymore, I want to pass it on, or if something were to happen, how's my business going to keep going? Who's going to manage it? Who has access?
Yeah.
So like I said, start now and work your way to actually creating them.
And Natalie, I believe that you went through your job's 401k retirement system to have a consultation with your attorney, correct?
That's correct. Yeah.
And that was the end cost associated with that?
There is a monthly cost that I pay, or I should say I pay bi-weekly.
Okay.
I'm fairly lucky in that it's reasonable. I pay $7 every paycheck.
Okay.
For basic attorney services, like anything contractual. If I wanted to, let's say I wanted to rent out my home, I needed someone to help me draft that kind of contract, or an estate, a will or something like that. So if you're lucky enough, maybe that's something you should even look into. Does your company offer that? Because sometimes when you're filling out benefits, open enrollment or what have you, there's so much going on, and you're mainly thinking about medical and dental. You're not necessarily thinking about legal services. So it's something worth looking into for those who may not know. Does your company even offer that? Can you get some?
I know also too, some companies have some legal services available through employee EAP, employee assistance programs as well. So that's also a starting place. If they don't do it, then they can provide some resources as well.
Right.
And then, of course, we have Latavia, who has her own suite as well. So we'll make sure you have all of her information, but be sure to follow her as well, as she has the resource information and is licensed in the state of Maryland, correct?
Yes, I'm licensed in Maryland, DC, and North Carolina.
Nice. All right. So we got where should we start? So we talked about the documents. We talked about should we start with, we're going to start with the medical directive forms. And then where do we start? Because when we talk about estate planning, there's so many different components of it. So I personally started with the repads, but that may not be where everybody should start. Maybe you should start with your house.
Hey, I get there's not necessarily a right or wrong place to start. You have to think about what's important to you and what goals. So
that's what I did.
For you, hey, I know I love this and I need it to be there, and I need either a specific person or a specific group to make it.
Exactly.
Because this is a side note. My grandmother just passed, and we were at the repast on Monday, and there were people who made it. And my dad bit into it, like, well, because he thought one of his nieces made it. And he was like, real quick. He was like, it's not yours. It's not yours. Like, it's those small things.
They matter.
They matter, like I could laugh about it, but it's like, it's those small things that matter. So if you know, like I have a friend who she's like, this planning her funeral and the repast, like that's gonna be her last party. And
exactly. I want a DJ out of that.
He has the details written out because this is gonna be my last bang. I want it to be a certain way. So you have to, and then when I'm meeting with clients, that is one of the first things I ask. Like, what are your goals? What do you, like Natalie mentioned, one of her primary goals was providing for her niece.
She's a lot more deeper than I am.
It is okay. We have levels. We all have levels. But that's your goal. You know where your goal is, and then you work back from there. So thinking about what are your goals, and I say kind of start just once again writing those out. What's important? What do I want to do? And then work from there. And then there's a lot of things that I tell people that you can do. When I mentioned earlier, that aren't necessary. People don't always think about as a part of the estate planning process. But there's things that you can do that are going to, essentially what you decide will happen regardless of if you have a will or a trust. So, for example, you guys were talking earlier about your retirement plans or the different, and if you have life insurance, essentially anything that you have where there's a contract and you list a beneficiary, making sure your beneficiary is updated. And if you do have someone listed that is currently a minor, making sure a lot of the different life insurance companies and even retirement companies, they do allow you to designate essentially someone who would serve as a guardian, kind of that fiduciary role for a minor if you were to pass while they're still a minor, to manage those funds until the actual beneficiary becomes of age. Caveat to that, you need to make sure it's somebody that you trust to do what you want to do, because when that money gets transferred to them, it is theirs to do. So like anything with the beneficiary. So if you have retirement accounts, investment accounts, making sure those things are updated. Bank accounts, most banks now allow you to designate a transfer on death or payable on death person.
Okay.
And the way that works is with like a life insurance. Once I pass, they present the death certificate, verify identity that they're the person who's listed. They will release the funds to that person.
Okay. That seems easy.
That the benefit there is, let's say, hey, I've been I've been saving, putting aside money. I have a sizable amount of cash of money in an account. And I have said I wanted that to be used to cover final expenses, funeral expenses, or just, hey, there's enough in here to cover the mortgage for X number of months or years.
Right.
If you don't have access to those funds, it's like you don't have it. Right. And then you wait and go through the probate process. Going to court, opening the case, then them reviewing everything, and then the court issuing what they call letters of administration, which is essentially like a permission slip to the bank to say, okay, you can give them this money now. And so those are things you can do that don't cost you any additional money to help prepare for after your death. And then, of course, like I said, having a conversation with an attorney or a financial advisor about a will or a trust, seeing which is going to be best for you.
I love that. You talked a couple words that came up, definitely probate, and I want to get to that, but also mortgage. So let's say you have a mortgage. What should you do? Are there any documents that should be going into your will to make sure that that person has access to pay your mortgage? Are there any like short forms or shortcuts for that?
I'll say with that, it depends, because most people who have a mortgage, they still owe money on it. So you have your deed or your title, and then there's whoever you're paying the mortgage to. And so a lot of things are automated now. So if you have the account information, then anybody can go in there and keep making the payments. it's a bit trickier or harder now with mortgage companies when someone passes, because it used to be that essentially if I died and I said I wanted to leave my house to you, then they present the will and they show that, and then they allow you to assume the loan.
Okay.
Finance companies are not allowing that anymore. You would
Wow.
essentially have to apply and qualify for financing on your own to
Mm.
be able to have the mortgage switched into your name. And I ran into that a lot when I did foreclosure prevention, because it's, hey, they were the one, the person who passed away was one working and they were paying, and whomever they left the house to couldn't afford it, or they could afford it for a little while, then something happened and they got behind, and then it's trying to apply for a modification, and so then it becomes a bit more complicated. And so that's where I know there are some insurance policies that you can have where it includes a provision that in the event of death, the mortgage is paid in full,
Mm.
or making sure, and that's where having conversations become even more important, because there's not necessarily a form per se. Some states, maybe like 6 or 7, have what's called a transfer on death deed. And that allows you to, similar to the bank account, just designate a person that when I die, this is who the deed goes to. And you don't have to go through probate, but that still doesn't affect if you still owe money.
Okay.
There's 2 components. And that's where having a conversation with an attorney as well as a finance person.
Mm-hmm.
If you know your house is subject to a mortgage, having something in place to make sure that it can continue to be paid for, or whomever you're planning to leave it to is in a position to continue making the payments.
I love that. I love that. That's great information, because we see these stories a lot of where, someone passes and then they aren't able to keep the home. And a lot of times we don't know the circumstances behind that, right? And so knowing that person now needs to qualify for a loan as if they were applying for the mortgage. Hopefully that's just the balance of the mortgage, I'm assuming.
Yes.
And been able to pay that on their own. It's good to know. It's good to know. Or they have the option to sell. I think that's also an option as well.
Yes. And if I could, for that, you reminded me of something. Reverse mortgages are on the rise, and our community is often the target of them. And so, in layman's terms, is essentially, we get a mortgage, they give us money to buy the house. With the reverse mortgage, essentially the bank is offering the owner either a percentage, or like a percentage based on the equity they have in the home. Get it as a lump sum, or they get like a monthly amount. They are authorized by the government, so most people think, hey, they're safe, but they do target older people, or people who are above 60, because that's one of the requirements.
Right.
It's very few, very, very few situations I've seen where those work out well for anyone, because the way it works is, I think you have to be over 62. So as long as someone above that age is living in the house, it's fine. But as soon as that person passes or is no longer living there, all the money that they advance is due right away.
Wow.
So unless you have all of that money, which a lot of times it's over 100,000 to pay right away, usually they foreclose and it's now the bank's house. So there's no passing it on. There's not much you can do. So that's just something I always try to tell people to kind of be aware of as their parents, because oftentimes they'll get them and they don't tell anybody.
Yeah.
And you don't find out until it's too late. So like I said, if you take nothing else from tonight, please have conversations. Talk about what you're doing and what you want, because a lot of these things can be avoided if we just share and not keep everything, like do everything in secret.
I love that. And that's some of the things that you're talking about is also just expanding like our emotional capacity, emotional intelligence to communicate better, to be open, to let people in, to be vulnerable, you know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's really important, especially when if we're talking about seasoned loved ones who, are coming from a different generation where there's a lot of things we just didn't talk about or don't talk about because it's uncomfortable, but really kind of saying this is, how do we create a safe space to have this conversation? And for me, I really try to center it in love. Like, I love you, and I want to make sure that I'm doing these things right on your behalf. I want to make sure that I'm alleviating stress on your behalf or my behalf. And how can we make sure that information. For me, I started with a family Google Drive folder where we can just begin to put, everybody has information in their heads on pieces of the papers and file cabinets. Like, I don't know where to start. So I think one of the things that was important to me was aggregating all this information. Do you have any tips and tools about where the paper should be, how they should be filed and located and stored for us, Latavia? And then Natalie, I want to know, what was your process of kind of saying, making sure the documents were in the right place?
Excuse me, though. That's a great question. And I love that you started the Google Drive. I'm like, I might need to start one with my family. We all have group chats. So, so that is a great idea. It always kind of defaults wherever you keep your important papers, important documents, keep your estate planning documents with that as well. I cannot think of the name of the company, but someone actually reached out to me. There's a company, and there's a few of them that have essentially kind of created cloud-based services to where you can upload all of your information and store it there, and then you can designate who has access to it. So similar to the Google Drive thing. If you have a will, one of the things you can do is, in just about every state, you can register it with their county's register of deeds. So you can put, essentially, they would have the original will on file, and then you keep a copy. So that way, whenever you do pass, you make sure someone in the family knows to go there, and that's there. It's safe. Saved there. Otherwise, some people do safety deposit boxes.
Oh, okay.
But the thing with that is making sure that people know that they and that they can access it. Because if you do all this and you do all of this, you have the plan down to the T, what you want to wear, what food, who you want, where you want, how you want to be buried, who's going to get what. But if you pass and nobody knows that you did it, it's going to end up being treated as though you didn't have a will. And I think when you and I talked, I shared about with Aretha Franklin, found 4 different wills or attempts at wills. None of them are valid. And so she passed in 2018. We're now in 2022. They are still trying to sort through different aspects of her estate in terms of who gets what's owed. So like I said, just the biggest thing is pulling it together. Like, I have a big like accordion folder of all my important papers that I keep all of my stuff in, but I'm trying to get some of that stuff digitized. But I think having a set place other than under your mattress, hopefully something secure, that you have everything, and then making sure that at least 1 or 2 people know,
right,
I've done this is what I want, and this is where you can find it.
I love that. Natalie, what was your process of making sure the documents were in the right place? And
yeah, I think she is so right. I mean, she hit the nail on the head. People need to know. So I think about who your family or your friends are and what they're like when they're not under stress and grieving, right? Because their state of mind, when you're gone, they're not necessarily going to be in the best frame of mind to find documents for you. So I talked to my mother. I know my mom is generally like not as organized as me. So I made it very simple. I told her my will is in my firebox. I have a fireproof box in my house. It's where my deed is. It's where my IDs. It's where basically anything, most important documents that would be difficult to replace. And that's why I have it. And I gave my mom a key to my house, so that, in the event that something happens to me, you can just come on in and this is where the stuff is. So I didn't file with the courts only because I talked to the attorney and asked her if she recommended. And she said, really, as long as you have it someplace that, like your fireproof box, that's fine. She said, you could file it with the courts. But I thought about, again, my family. And are they the type of people that are going to think to go to the court? I know them well. They're not. So I just made it really simple. It's in my closet. in the fireproof box. That's my process.
I'm
And I
typing
gave
fireproof box on my my notes.
so the fireproof box was actually referred to me by my title when I closed on the house.
Oh,
The
okay.
day I closed on the house at the title company, he said, right now, go get a fireproof box before you go to your house. And that's what I did. I went to Lowe's, I went to Home Depot and got a fireproof box, and I put that document in it, and all my important docs are there. So I don't know if that worked for everybody, but I think for simplifying it, it might be a good idea to just, like you said, have a conversation, let them know where the documents are, and make it easy for
Does
them.
filing in with the court give it any more weight? Like in the state of Maryland? Okay, no.
No, it doesn't give it any more weight. It's literally just so that, hey, there's not a question of where it is, but like you said, you got to know your people. People in my family don't even know where a courthouse is, don't want to go, because that has a negative connotation. Why are we going? And then the other, so like I said, it doesn't give any more weight. It's just one of those things of saying, I know where it is.
Okay.
And now if the court loses it, that's a whole other issue, and it's on them. But the other thing too to keep in mind, if you decide that you want to register it with the court, I know us less seasoned folks are a little more transient.
Right.
And so if you do move, like if you're like me, I've moved a lot. You have to remember to then go to the county you were living in and let them know I'm moving, and so that you can transfer it to the new county. So it could add, like as Ned was saying, it could potentially add more stress if you know that people are not inclined to go to the courthouse to look for it. But it is an option. But I think the fireproof box is great. A lot of businesses use those. I would say, electronic storage or cloud-based things are good, but the thing specifically with the will is you need the original. Not gotten to the point where courts are recognizing digital signatures. I feel like we're heading in that direction. But for now, you need the original, because even if, let's say, there is an original, but the family can't find it, but they have a copy, the court won't accept that.
So let's talk about the other word you brought up real quick about probates. And one of the most public cases that we've seen recently is that you brought up in our conversation was Chadwick Boseman and his family versus, his spouse. Can you talk a little about what probate is and why we are trying to do as much as we can to avoid that?
Sure. So probate is the process of administering the estate, or essentially making sure that your things get handled, kind of settling of the assets. And so probate essentially means you're going to the court and the court is overseeing the process. If it's a smaller estate, it can be fairly straightforward. There are fees associated with it, but if it's one of the other things with probate that people always talk about when they're trying to avoid it is these taxes. The threshold is in the millions in most states. And so the vast majority of us, that does not apply to us.
Okay.
But it's still important to keep in mind in terms of thinking of Chadwick Boseman, his estate, a bit larger than mine, a bit larger.
A little bit.
And so for whatever reason, when he passed, he didn't have a will. And so with that is, every state has something called intestate succession. Their Intestate Succession Act or laws. And what that is the states have gone through and tried to think about what the average person would want to happen when you pass. So if you're married and you don't have any children, then the thought is everything goes to your spouse. If you're not married and your parents are still living, everything goes to them or to your siblings, children, so on and so forth. And so with the situation with Chadwick Boseman, there was no will. There didn't appear to be a trust. He was married. And so I believe his wife petitioned to be the essentially personal representative or executor of the state. That term varies depending on what state you're in, but essentially it's the person responsible for making sure the wishes are carried out or things get handled. I believe the default would have been that because he was married and had no children, everything went to his spouse, or majority went to her and a percentage to his parents. She chose she requested that everything be split evenly between he and his parents. But from that tells me they have a great relationship. They just wanted things to be be sorted out. That's not the case with everyone. Another high profile one is Aretha Franklin's estate. Like I said, it was handled intestate or through probate, and her son, I think she has 4 sons, and they all were essentially, I want my part. What is this? One of her sons is someone who has special needs, but there was no provision for who's going to provide for his care. So then, he has a guardian or someone appointed. They all have attorneys who have been essentially trying to decide who should get what and how much. And then she also had the IRS in there. But essentially, it's like I said, it's the process. And so if you have a will, you're still going to go through that probate process, but it's typically a little less stressful because you already have instructions of what that person wanted. And then it's just a matter of carrying it out.
I love that. I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I'm saying when there are no instructions, then it's like looking at what the law says and then everyone kind of vying for their piece of the pie.
I love that. So, hey, if you have questions, let us know. Type them in the chat or type them in the question box if you want to be. I don't think that's anonymous. So, but if you want to type it in the question box, feel free to let us know. One of the things that you mentioned. So, let's talk about some terms. We've talked about trustee. Can we do like a rapid? I'll have Natalie. Can you define trustee? Latavia, can you define executor of the estate? And how many should you have? Who should be involved? What should that look like? Natalie, can you answer?
So I will make a very feeble attempt at defining trustee. I am not, listeners, an attorney. I have just done a will where I have a minor trust. And the trustee, as I understand it, is the person that is going to take responsibility for the money that I'm leaving to my minor niece. And so when I pass away, I have instructions that say, when she turns 18, I want X amount of dollars. When she turns 20, I want this amount. When she turns 21, 22. And so I have the money that I'm leaving her staggered, hoping that she doesn't spend it all at once, give her some time to kind of mature a little. But there's a trustee who's going to be overseeing that. And that person is the one who's going to hold that money in the account and disperse that to my niece. So it's the one you trust, really, with the money to disperse it. Now, that's my understanding. I don't know how well I did there. I'll let the attorney.
You did good. You did good. That is what I'm sure there's a few others. Some people would use a lot of, bigger words, but that is what it is in essence. And if it helps, if anyone listening or watching has seen the show Power, at the end of, when I don't remember his name, but Alvin from the Cosby Show he played the trustee of Ghost's estate, and he was the trustee, that person. So essentially, when you're ready for something, you want a disbursement or you want something to be changed or a decision to be done, they had to go to the trustee because they are the ones with the control. And you'd asked about it and what an executor is. An executor is similar to the trustee. They are the person who is responsible for making sure the wishes of the person who passed away are carried out.
I love that. And we have a question. It says, would you recommend getting a will through your employer as a starting point?
Yes, because especially if you have a plan like Natalie has, definitely take advantage. Hey, I try to be reasonable, but I'm not $7 a month. And most attorneys aren't. So yes, definitely look into your benefits, talk to your HR department. I know a few places that I worked, they did have that option. So certainly do that. Even if it maybe it doesn't include the actual drafting of the documents, if you can at least get a consultation, that's a great starting point to just help you kind of organize your thoughts and give you a game plan. So certainly check to see what you have access to. I know there's some prepaid legal plans. They are not all created equal. Certain, depending on where you live, there's a lot of different organizations that do provide some of the estate planning services for free. Like I used to participate in a Wills for Heroes. So if you're a first responder or a veteran, a lot of them have income restrictions. So depending on what your income levels are, that's something that you could do where you could potentially get some of it done for free or low bono. So take advantage of your resources.
I love that. How do you know, or what are some components of the will? We talked about, of course, health. We talked about minors. We talked about property. Are there any other components of the will that we want to talk about that need to be included in it, or like a key component of the will?
Yes, great question. So some of the key components are obviously make sure it states your name, who you are. You hear if we ever watch the movie about I, Latavia Alexander, being of sound mind and body. You want to make sure that language is in there because one of the requirements is that you do have to be of legal age and sound mind to create it. And that's typically at the beginning of a will. If somebody creates a will for you and that's not there, you need to ask some questions.
Indeed.
But so that then there's the kind of a recital of who you are. If you are married, it's good to identify the spouse, children. If you have adopted children or stepchildren that you are acknowledging as your own, you want to make sure all of those names are listed. Encourage people to list full names just so there are no questions. If you own property, you want to specify what you want to have happen with that property, especially if you have multiple properties, real estate, kind of listing all of that out, what you have, what you want to have it happen to it. If there are children that you have that you want to disinherit, you need to specify that. You can try disinheriting a spouse, but most states prevent that. And then in terms of, we say kind of the tangible assets. So if it's clothing, vehicles, if there's collector's items, any type of specific things, or if there are any charitable bequests that you want to make, like I want to leave, I want to create an endowment for my alma mater, or I want to give money to my church, specifying those things. And then there's a section called the Residuary Clause, which is essentially anything that's left after all of the specific things I've listed, who you want that to go to or how you want that to be divided. A key component is designating who you want to be the personal representative or executor, essentially who's responsible for making sure what I said I want happen to be there. So those are kind of the key ones. There's some other clauses that can be included, specifically if you have minor children. You want to make sure you talk about who do you want to be the person who takes care of them, or what that would look like. Animals, things like that.
I love that. And we got one question, which we touched on, but what typically happens if you're single with no kids? What happened to their property? So we talked about that a bit. So
short answer is it depends. Most, like if you're single and no children, if your parents are still living, then it's typically going to go to them. Or if you have siblings, it would go to them. But then it still kind of brings into question of, if you own that property and it's not subject to a mortgage, then they get it and they just have to keep it up. If you own it and it is subject to a mortgage or any other type of financing, it will be up to that person to decide, okay, can I keep making these payments? Do I sell it? Do I let it go to foreclosure? So there's some of those components. So it really depends on kind of the other factors.
I love that. So you talked about some of the resources that are available, and we talked about, are there any other resources for like low to moderate income in the area that can help, with getting information? And then Natalie, were there any places that you searched like online that you found that were really beneficial to like helping you come up with, language that you wanted to be included in the document?
I'll let Latavia go first.
Okay. Some resources, as I mentioned, so I know specific to Maryland, the Pro Bono Resource Center of Maryland, they do, I forget the name of it, but it's kind of like Wheels on Wheels. They do, because that was one of the projects that I worked with, that they provide events for, and that's where there's for lower income or certain income restrictions that they would have throughout the year. I'm not sure what that looks like now, post or almost post-pandemic.
Right.
But that's one resource where you could go. Like I said, we would do them. You signed up in advance, filled out a questionnaire, and then you came and got all your documents created that same day by an attorney. Community Legal Services of Prince George's County is another one. That's actually an organization I work for in DC. There are a few different nonprofit organizations. They don't all necessarily do estate planning, but they have partnerships with attorneys who have agreed to provide certain services, either pro bono or low bono, and it's kind of a scale. Not a lot, but some law schools have clinics that you can go and, like I said, if not get the actual documents created, you can have a conversation or get a consultation about it. And so I would say looking at those things wherever you live, and I'm talking specific DC, Maryland, but this is the case, throughout the United States. If there's your local bar association, sometimes they have a referral list, and then also some different community organizations, or even churches, because I know sometimes partnered with churches to do educational seminars, where at least you can get information and then be connected with attorneys who are either low bono or they might also be regular price. But yeah.
That's so helpful. I think I think the key point here is like to get a consultation, to talk to an actual person. And I know a lot of times we just rely strictly on the internet. But I think it's so important to get questions answered by something so important to get answered by another human being as much as possible. Natalie, was there any places that you went to help shape some of your language online that you found helpful?
So I did find some places helpful, specifically when it came to looking for information about burial. So I thought about whether or not I wanted, a big fancy casket that would really sit in the ground, or if I could do it more economically and maybe more environmentally friendly. So I actually did some searches for, eco-friendly burials. Like, what are the options and what are some affordable ways to be buried, or if you're going to be cremated, what are the options? And so the searches were really helpful. I can't remember the name of it right now, but it was Maryland State has a couple of websites where they can help you find eco-friendly burial sites. So what that means, it's basically instead of you can either be buried in a casket that will biodegrade, so that it's not made of metal and parts that will just kind of sit there, or you can be put into an urn that has trees planted above it, or you can also have a burial shroud, which sounds kind of like archaic, and that sounds weird, a burial shroud, but you can just be put in basically a kind of a garment almost, biodegrade as well. So that was what was helpful for me. I think just finding more financially responsible and really environmentally responsible ways to be buried, because ultimately, I am a part of nature. It's a natural process for us to go back into the world in some other forms. If we go and part of us becomes gases or liquids, or and so I thought about the fact that I want to do this as simply and as naturally as possible. So those websites did help me find ways to do that.
I love that. And I think one of the things that I also saw that you had, we've talked about, is that, you wanted poems, recited at your funeral service. And I want to say by Black women, or, I might be adding that to it. That might be my own interpretation of it.
No, you're spot on. I saw it as an opportunity to infuse our culture and our heritage into it. And so I did specifically request that poetry be read, and not particularly religious poetry. I wanted poetry from the Black diaspora. And I wanted music as well, African music, indigenous music. played, I saw it as an opportunity to really personalize it. And, these are things you wouldn't necessarily think about. You're not thinking about your funeral, but when it's kind of morbid at first, but actually when you start to think about it some more, you're like, I actually would like this. I decided I wanted purple flowers put, on the shroud because purple is one of my favorite colors and what that means to me. So, so yeah, it was good searching for, traditional ways also. What are some of the African traditions that maybe were lost?
Yes.
That we've kind of disconnected with. Most of us, we've been to a church funeral and a church burial, but we don't even know sometimes like where these traditions come from.
Right.
So I really did some searching into West African culture. How do they bury? How do they honor their dead? And so I tried to incorporate some of what I found in my searches from, into my own service.
I love that. I said that I wanted Church Girl by Beyonce.
Okay. But I love that because we tend to think of funerals as being, they're sad. Obviously, it's a loss, right?
Mm-hmm.
But it doesn't mean that we have to stay in that place. We're celebrating the life. And who were you? Like Charlene, like you're a bright, beautiful, energetic person, right? And we would be doing you a disservice by remembering you, somberly, right? We want to remember who you are, your light, and so spot on. I like that. I love that.
And I did praise dance growing up, and I just figured like I was always twerking in rehearsal, and they would always try to chastise me. Well, like the beat would be like there, and so I was like, I want my vengeance. Like I was right. Like
this is my time. No,
this is my time.
That's like I think all those things are great, and even to that, I wanted to add in terms of the different options. If there's anyone listening or knows anyone who's a veteran, a lot of times people want to be buried, and they want a military burial. Those do not all happen automatically, or they want to be buried in one of the federal cemeteries. You have to essentially apply or do a petition to do that ahead of time. So that's something else that you can do ahead of time, and kind of like I said, we just my grandmother just passed. So, but one of the things that there's several lessons, but one of the things that I always appreciated more recently is she had planned everything out.
Oh, good.
Even to, specifically what song she wanted sung, what she wanted to wear, where things were. And so it made, I know it was still difficult, but I know for my dad and his sisters, it made that process just a little smoother.
Yeah.
She had done it years ago, had conversations, so they knew where to go, knew what to do, what she wanted. There were a few minor details that had to still be made or adjusted, but I know that lifted, that alleviated.
Absolutely.
And so, and I'm all for Church Girl because that's,
hey.
I see somebody wrote it. I see Nikki wrote Church Girl.
Hey. Well, you get it. It's really important, and I think that's the same thing that it just made me start thinking about, like, what elements of myself do I really want to be included? I really think about women like Maya Angelou and Toni Morrison, who live these full dynamic. We talk about Maya Angelou is typically honored just for her writing, but she was a stripper, she was a dancer, she did all these. She was a dynamic woman, right? And we typically only honor the part that we're comfortable with, or what white people are comfortable with, and not the totality of who we are. And I think as Black people specifically, Black women specifically, that that we should be able to live and to be honored for the fullness of who we are. And so I think even that intentionality, Natalie, what you're talking about, the researching of West African burials and African celebrations and traditions, some things that we brought over that we don't even, aware of. I went to a non-Black funeral once in my life, and it was totally different. It was night and day. And I was thinking about how much song and how much, even in sadness, like there's still a lot of celebratoriness that goes into Black funeral and homegoing celebration. And we say homegoing because, you know, we believe in that. And so much of that is not named. I think there's a power in naming that this is part of our ancestral traditions that we're keeping up. All right. I think that's it. Anything else that we missed that y'all want to share that I forgot about or we didn't cover? Any other last minute questions in the chat? Thank you all for being here, for being concerned about it, saying, hey, we want to figure this thing out together. I really appreciate you all taking time on a Wednesday evening to share with us.
There was one thing I forgot to mention in my research, ashes. So I also thought about being cremated and maybe having my ashes scattered. And something I found really surprising is that you can take ashes on planes. So let's say you wanted to be, you're cremated in Maryland, but you want your ashes scattered in Senegal. You want your ashes scattered in Alabama. You can do that, So it's good to know for people who might kind of want that kind of a ceremony. Maybe they don't want to be buried, but maybe you want your ashes scattered someplace significant to you. You actually can have them transported or give instructions for whoever's going to be handling that to transport them to that location and have a ceremony there. So just good to know. But again, you wouldn't necessarily think to Google, can my ashes be taken on a plane when I die? The answer is yes, they can. I mean, you can't take them in your travel bag. You gotta.
Oh, okay. You have to go through a special.
Yeah, you have to put them in they go under the plane basically with your luggage.
Okay.
Yeah. And there are some places where you'll go where you may have to say that.
Mm.
But in most cases you don't.
Okay.
Yeah.
That is great to know.
Who knew?
I wanted to add just in terms of creating documents or creating your plan. One of the things, and this I included in any service I provide, a complimentary 3-year review. And so what I always encourage people is the same as essentially if there's any major life event, you want to go back and review your document, review your plan to make sure that it still applies. So we talked early on about, hey, if you're estranged from your spouse, or if you get divorced and you remarry, make sure you've gone back, updating your beneficiaries, updating your document. And you may not always have to make any changes, but it's good to go back and review it just to make sure it's still going to accomplish the things that you want to accomplish. And then I guess one other thing in terms of the planning for your burial, your funeral, things of that nature, in addition to planning it out to the detail, you can also pay for these things up front. So
right. Hello.
You don't have to, you can plan it. You can also pay for it. So you can pay for it ahead of time, or you can do it to where they kind of have like this kind of pre-death estimate or pre-plan, whatever, where you have essentially lock in your rate. Because
which is cheaper.
It's cheaper. It also, once again, it alleviates stress. Or even if it's not paid for, you, like I said, if you have the funds for it set aside in a specific account, or you've directed that you want proceeds from your life insurance policy to pay for it, you can do that. Once again, kind of the caveat with the life insurance is whoever you list as the beneficiary.
Right.
They are they legally have this, that money is theirs legally to do with what they want. So don't always rely on life insurance to do all the stuff that you want to do. But yeah, those are just some additional things to think about, as well as if you are in, I mentioned military, if you are in any type of fraternity or sorority or organization, that your organization has specific rituals or processes for when the person passes, make sure someone in your family and friends knows that.
Yeah.
That can also be incorporated into your plan.
I love that. And just piggyback on what you said about the veterans, that also goes for their spouses as well. That's typically, I've seen like a couple week delay between, the funeral services and then being able to go to the burial site. So again, like you said, if that's already designated or the spouse is already assigned to a particular plot, I think that helps as well. I know you can also buy family plots as well. And I think, you can get bundles and things of that nature. So that's also important to think about as you're thinking about planning as well. I think that's it. I feel good. Did we get everything in?
I feel like
Oh.
All right. So, Natalie, tell us where they can find you. If they have some more questions. You are on Instagram a little bit. No, not a bit.
Just a tiny bit. I'm on Instagram. Yeah, one Natalie Iana, Natala. Well, it's one Nat Iana. I don't even know the name. That tells you how frequently I'm on here.
You're frozen on my screen.
Am I? Oh, how about now?
I don't see you, but Latavia, you're moving.
Oh, I was trying to get her name so we could
Okay, yeah.
look to see what her name. I think it's one Nat.
Yeah, one Nat Anaya.
Yes.
Okay.
It's one Nat Iana.
There she got it. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for coming through, F. Mason. Appreciate you. Latavia has all the good y'all should hit her up. Hit her up. She's about that life. Latavia, tell us where they can find you, book a consultation, all that.
Yeah, so my name is Latavia. On Instagram, it's LA Legal Solutions, and that's with the Z. It's a same on Facebook. My website is lalegalsolutions.com. If you want to book a consultation, there's a link in my bio on Instagram, as well as links to some of the other resources. I do blogs periodically just to talk about different aspects of estate planning as well as business. Also, if you want, it may be a little old, I did a similar thing, similar session back in 2020 with a tax attorney where that one we went in a little bit more about trust. So if you're interested, you can find that on YouTube. I think that's on my podcast page. It's all good. But that's up there as well.
And then you can also just DM her and ask for the link as well.
That would probably be the quickest because like I said, I don't remember which one it's on right now. But yeah.
All right. And then we will save this and it will be on YouTube as well. So you can share it. You can revisit it. You can use it as a starting point. You can use it as a conversation starter. I will be doing it with my parents. So we, of course, want you all to be well and healthy, but we also want you all to be smart and proactive in things we know that's going to happen, and that we can make sure that we are intentional about the assets that we work so hard to gain, that it's not lost as we transition. All right. Thank you. If all hearts and minds are clear, of course, we're starting with today. You can follow us at Starting With Today on all social media platforms. On Twitter, we're starting W Today. My name is Charlene Anderson. You can follow me at true_Charlene on all social media handles. And we'll be back soon with some big news. So stay tuned. You can subscribe to our newsletter on our website, and you can stay tuned for all the great things we have going on. We appreciate y'all. Y'all have a great one.
Right.
Bye.
Thanks for having me.